I thought this may be too far gone. I don't know if we can repair what's broken. The more broken it is, the easier it is to see big initial gains with little effort. And then that creates all kinds of momentum for a company to really just double down and triple down on their investment because they can see early returns. My number one purpose is to get you home safe. Your wife and family is more important than this piece of equipment. And when we get that right, the unifying purpose in an organization, it's kind of fundamental to our new cultural identity.
Welcome to the Electrical Safety Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Travis, and today I have a special guest, Paul Krismer. Paul, thanks for coming on the show.
Totally my pleasure. Happy to be here, John.
Yeah, so I guess, we don't know a whole lot about each other, so I was hoping that you could just kind of, give me a bit of background on your story, kind of how you got involved in safety, and then how that led you into maybe specializing on culture. So yeah, if you just want to start with, you can go back as far as you like and take as long as you like.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. My background is primarily in insurance. I work for a really, really large workers' compensation insurance company doing a lot of different leadership roles. And at some point I was given an assignment as the executive account manager that was dealing with high risk, high claims volumes employers. And myself and my team, our job was to try to help these folks become a safer work environment and manage their claims when they do have them better. And that was really satisfying work. And at some point I realized I had so much fun with it that rather than taking on all the other side projects that the big insurance company had for me, I wanted to just do it on my own. Mm-hmm. So when January 1st, 2016, I started my own business and consult and speak on these topics basically all around the world, although primarily here in North America.
And then you were saying, as we were speaking earlier, like it's at some point you sort of realize that it's not so much about the policy and the paperwork and all that as it is culture. So how did you come to that realization?
I'll tell you a little bit of a story on that one, John. It's interesting. My team and we used to think that we added a lot of value. And we'd go, and this was back in the day when safety programs were in binders rather than on somebody's computer. Mm-hmm. And we'd go in and we'd microscopically study these binders. And sometimes we thought we were adding a lot of value. We'd add a clause to a job safety breakdown, or we'd, have a critical insight about some accident investigation procedure. And genuinely, we thought that this kind of wordsmithing was what safety was about. It was about the program. And there was a particular employer I'm a Canadian, I'm in northern British Columbia. There was a particular employer there that was in stump to dump logging, doing all the hard risks, chopping down trees, building crude logging roads, yarding the trees up to the roads, and then in massive off-highway logging trucks, sending these 100,000-pound missiles down the mountains. And in British Columbia, all the easy wood was harvested long ago off the flatland. All the wood that we've got now is on pretty steep vertical mountainsides. And this particular company, we'd be knocking on the door. They had problems before this particular year, but in one particular year, they lost 5 people, 5 fatalities. And obviously, John, I don't need to tell you as a safety guy that any fatality is a tragedy for a company. Mm-hmm. But 5 is just devastating. And what's more, this company only had 450 employees. So 5 people out of 450 employees is crazy. And moreover, they were a one industry town. This employer was the industrial base for the town. And you can imagine people lost, church leaders, baseball coaches, fathers, uncles, sons. It was absolutely devastating to their community. And the company that owned the trees up there, a company called Western Forest Products, after the 5th fatality, they went in there and said, you guys are done. We're never going to do business with you again. When your 10-year contract runs up a year and a half from now, that'll be the end. And moreover, nobody else in British Columbia will hire you either. You're done. And they countered with 2 pretty good arguments. The first argument was, the safety program we have is the one that you imposed on us when we contracted with you, mm-hmm. which was true. And the company I work for, the big insurance company, the insurance company gives us the maximum discount for the quality of our program that's available. It was a 5% discount. And that was also true. We gave them this big discount. Mm-hmm. And then the second argument was probably the more compelling one. And that was that if you take this company down, this whole town dies. We are the only industrial base. Schools, grocery stores, churches, everybody's homes instantly lose all of their value. This town will die. And so Western Forest Products gave them another chance and basically instructed them and said, go do whatever Paul Krismer tells you to do. And when they phoned me and said that that's the instruction they gave, I was like shrugging my shoulders. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with these guys. But immediately it was obvious, John, that it wasn't going to be about the program. For the first time in my life, I knew in a very serious way we had to work more directly on cultural facets of the company. And this was one of these companies that grew fast. The dad used to run the whole company from his pickup truck. And when there were only 30 employees, he could kind of yell at everybody from his pickup truck and get things productivity oriented. But there was enough personal relationship that he could have a barbecue in his backyard and all 30 employees would be there.
Right.
Well, when you grow from 30 employees to 450 employees, the love that comes across on a Sunday afternoon at a barbecue just doesn't translate into the day-to-day workings of the business. And so at the time I was inventing it from scratch, what a culture changing program would look like. I'm much more efficient now, all these many, many years later. But that was the big discovery for me. And we made this massive transformation for this company, going from one of the worst in a very dangerous industry in British Columbia to one of the best performers. And they are to this day remain a very good performer. And so the realization I had, and it was kind of shocking and maybe even a little saddening, I'd been wasting my time. For every well-established company in a well-established industry, the safety program was easy, and I know this is a silly thing to say, but if big companies lost their program, somehow it just disappeared from their organization, within 48 hours, they could literally come up with another world-class program that they would borrow, beg, or steal from another company. And I realized that there was just a ton, and not to say we don't need a safety program. Of course we do. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But that's the easy part. Getting stuff on paper that's a good program is super easy. Embedding the behaviors is something that requires a change in people's hearts. And that's all I do now in my work.
No, that's really good. Even in what we do, we specialize more in the electrical world, but I hear myself kind of saying the same thing to a lot of different people. It's like, you need to have it on paper, but it really doesn't matter. As long as you got the right idea, then on paper, the program or policy, whatever you call it, it's going to do fine. That's not the hard part. The hard part is, how do you get people to buy into that and to actually do it? And so, I'd love to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second, John. There's this remarkable thing. I'm sure you've seen it in your career too, where some companies actually have no safety program. They're usually little companies that grew fast, and they were kind of family-run operations that suddenly had a significant number of employees. And clearly they're operating outside of the bounds of law to not have a safety program.
Yes.
But remarkably, some of them had very good safety programs.
Yeah.
Or, safety outcomes, I should say. And it's because, if it was my Uncle Bob who was climbing up the ladder irresponsibly, we're just, hey, Bob, get off that ladder, you silly fool. I'm not going to have your wife calling me, complaining about how badly you're behaving. You could kind of manage it just with the nature and the quality of the relationships. But as soon as companies get any bigger than what that felt relationship can happen from one or two owners, you need to be intentional about creating culture and, of course, be compliant with the law and have a program in place. But that's the interesting thing, is that we can get success even in the absence of a program if the culture is really, really strong.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. So I guess I'm just thinking, because one thought I had when you're telling the story, I was curious if there was like one defining moment or thought where it just dawned on you that you mentioned you felt like you had been wasting your time. Like, was there something that you're like, oh my, or did it kind of just happen, sort of one piece at a time, and next thing you knew, when you look back, you're like, I went from here all the way to here, and this is the big shift that I made. So, was there anything that sticks out, or?
I think it was that one particular company with the 5 fatalities. And if I were to really go back to maybe, I don't know, 17 years ago or so that unfolded, it was actually more of a journey to
Hmm.
realize that it's about the culture, full
Right.
stop. But looking back all these years later, it feels like it was turning on a dime.
Yeah.
And when I made the realization, and I can't honestly tell you, John, how many months of doing this with this one company it took, but once I'd made the change in my focus and clear commitment that it's about culture and not about the program, I literally committed to myself, I will never work on the program again.
Hmm.
And when we do consulting work with large companies, I have colleagues and associates that if I need some program work done, I'll send them in to do it. But I refuse to do it. I just don't
Hmm.
want to. I think that my expertise is so much better put to use on changing people's hearts, which I know is a big statement, but it's true. That's where I want to devote my life effort.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start there then. So, if you imagine going into a company that's got 250 employees, no program written down or anything, but they want to make some changes, they want to make some improvements. Like, what is it that you're doing, and what is it that you're looking for when you kind of first get there? Like, what does that look like?
We usually would do what we call a discovery visit. So I might spend a week just spending time in whatever that plant is and doing my own observational stuff, which might be program related. Sometimes,
Hmm.
I see untidy workspaces or lack of guarding, that kind of thing. But most importantly, I'm actually interviewing people over and over and over again. And I'm asking them about, what their beliefs are about safety, what their beliefs are about the values of the company. And the thing I'm sure is that we very often see this complete disconnect between what the leaders of an organization believe is their culture
Hmm.
or think that they can espouse what the culture is and therefore it will just be. It's like I'm giving an order and
Yep.
saying everybody will wear red on Fridays. And when we say everybody should believe in whatever I think I believe in, just because I say it doesn't mean it's true.
Hmm.
And we often can then point out in detail to the leadership of a company this tremendous disconnect between the trust that frontline employees have in the leadership, what they believe the values of the company are, even things like what they believe are the permissible kind of interpersonal ways to connect with one another,
Hmm.
which often is very much central to how we run a company safe or not. If I believe the conversation, for example, has to be about productivity, 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 then the conversation about safety is simply unwelcome. And we're not conscious of it. Culture is the water we swim in. And as an external person, I can come in and genuinely get a pretty good sense of what the culture actually is. And when you share it with the firm, most times leaders go, "Oh, yeah, I see that now."
Hmm.
But since they live in that water day in, day out, it's very hard for them to observe it on their own. So that's the starting point, is kind of to get a what we call a cultural assessment.
Yeah. Is there ever companies that you go into and you kind of, after you do that assessment, you you look at it and you think, this is this is too far gone. This is too hard. Like, does that ever happen, or do you have different kind of methodologies for different groups?
Well, when I first started my work, I thought it would all be safety related, but culture extends to almost any outcomes that you
Hmm.
want from a company. And I have to admit, one time I worked with a prison, and safety was a concern for sure, like a big concern, but not in the ordinary way you and I might think of safety. It was
Yeah.
that they literally didn't know that their staff would react appropriately in a situation where a little, you know, fire broke out. And I'm not talking a literal fire, but some kind of like issue broke out in some cell block, and the staff wouldn't react correctly, and it would blow up in the organization's face such that they'd have, hostages taken, massive property damages, potential for lives lost, and then escapees, and the reputational damage would be phenomenal,
Hmm.
just broken trust forever. And with that company, it was really, really profoundly broken, such that when I first got there, I've been in prisons before, but I felt fearful. You could just feel, if you're sensitive to
Mm-hmm.
energetic and how you sometimes walk into a place and you didn't hear the conversation that was happening before you got there, something is profoundly wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly how this prison felt. It was just really, really unsafe. And the executives who ran the place, they didn't go to bed at night thinking about their to-do list. They went to bed at night with nightmares about the tragedies that they felt might occur.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to admit, when I began that one, that was quite a few years ago too. I thought this may be too far gone. I don't know if we can repair
Mm-hmm.
what's broken. And yet the opposite actually came to be what I believed. And that is that the more broken it is, the easier it is to see big initial gains with little effort. And then
Mm-hmm.
that creates all kinds of momentum for a company to really just double down and triple down on their investment because they can see early returns. Whereas a company that's already got a really good record, getting the extra incremental improvement can be challenging and take a long time to get to. And so sometimes they're a little bit less, they have less perseverance
Mm-hmm.
to get there. So my experience, I've worked with a really big, America's largest produce hauling company, a company out of California called Young's Commercial Transfer. And they were at a place where their insurance company was saying, we're not sure that we want to insure you anymore. You're simply running too high a risk. And in particular, if you're familiar with the insurance business, there's something called reinsurance. It's the papa insurance companies that insure the little smaller insurance companies, saying if something really devastating happens, if one of your big produce hauling trucks takes out a bus with 30, 25-year-old baseball players, that may be a liability we can't even afford as this papa insurance company, and we're not sure we can trust you to not have that kind of accident.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an existential crisis. The company was profitable, ran a really good business, but nobody wanted to insure them anymore. And so they had a compelling need to get their safety record in place or improved. And again, there was big gains made easily because the leadership at the very top of the corporation saw an imperative to change the way they had always tolerated their behaviors in the past. And for that company, as an example, they had an 80% reduction in claims costs in just one calendar year, first year after we got in there and started doing work with them, which was a direct insurance savings of $3 million, direct savings in claims costs of $3 million. And the academic evidence suggests, that you've probably seen these kind of studies before, that for every direct dollar you save in reduced injury costs, there's usually a 5 to 7 times hidden return on investment, which comes through, I don't have to hire new people. I don't have to keep the shop closed while we do an accident investigation. I don't have to deal with all the morale issues. There's people all around from the injury place. You don't get frozen in fear. There's just these, big trucks are no longer in the shop or, in the junkyard. There's a lot of additional savings. And so that company was another really good example of when it's bad enough, the return on investment is quick. And when it's pretty good, then the return on investment is slower and more incremental. But still, many good companies, as I'm sure you know,
Mm-hmm.
are always striving to find that new increment.
Yeah, well, you do find that, like, and I guess I was kind of envisioning some of the companies that we've worked over the years, and the you can really get a sense for, it's almost like their eagerness. Like, you start the project and everyone's paying attention and they really want to improve, and it's like, oh, this is going to be great, and then you get to the ones where half the people don't show up to the first meeting, and there's lots of excuses, and you know that we're not dealing with technical problems here. We're probably dealing with people and culture problems first.
And you often find that you have an enthusiastic leadership team in the safety department or the HR department, if that's where they reside. But more senior than that, traditional overarching concerns dominate: profitability, productivity, stakeholder interface, and safety is seen as that thing that we park over on that other side of the organization. And one of the things, I'm sure you've seen it many times too, and I don't know what your philosophy is, but like, I believe quite strongly that safety should never become the responsibility of a department that's outside of the chain of command for operations. Because if you have operations, there's a floor supervisor reporting up to a chain of command that's completely different than the chain of command for safety. The most often thing that I see in those firms is people see the safety leader show up in their shop floor and they go, yeah, this is, your problem, fix it. Because, I'm busy worried about productivity. And of course, the safety leader, whatever their job title is, they don't actually have any direct authority over the work that's being done in that area. And it's not to say that model can't work where there are two different departments, but it is profoundly more difficult than when the chain of command includes safety leaders in the operational side of the business.
Yeah, it's oftentimes they have no authority and they have no budget, and it's kind of like, how did you expect that to succeed, right?
That's right.
I had a question here, just kind of taking things maybe in a different direction a little bit, but what do most leaders get wrong about building a positive culture?
I've served in executive roles, and so when I say this, I don't mean it to be critical because I have been there myself, but there's usually a certain amount of arrogance about culture. The belief is that leaders can make decisions about the culture of an organization, often in the same way that they might make a decision about investing in a new, addition to the plant. And if they say, oh, well, this is going to require some change management, we're going to have to communicate to all the masses that there needs to be change, they might invest in a communications plan. And so, there might be new posters on the shop floor, but not really any kind of thing that's functionally changing the way that frontline leadership works. And senior leaders don't actually have as much influence directly on the culture of an organization as they would want to have. Their influence is muted. It's only the degree to which they influence the management style of frontline leaders where they can be effective. And then there's those frontline leaders that actually have to make the changes at the coalface. And so it's the investment at that level in the organization that's so critical. So we always, as best we can, we're a for-profit organization, so we'll sometimes do things the way our clients want us to do. But our ideal circumstance is that we take senior leaders through the exact same training first that we then provide to frontline leaders. And we want there to be this integration that we're all saying the same thing and we're all believing the new set of beliefs. And if the frontline leaders are taught one thing and the senior leaders are doing a different thing, obviously the disconnect will remain and we probably won't get the cultural change we want. And so that's the biggest thing, is to emphasize this accountability for culture is felt at the senior leadership levels as something they need to learn, a sort of behaviors and attitudes and interpersonal styles and emotional intelligence that will be the same things taught to the frontline leaders. And it's a new way that we communicate within the business. And if we can get leaders to see the error of their ways, that it's not a communication program or it's not a declaration, we shall be, safety is job one, then you've got some traction and you can kind of get going on real cultural change.
Okay, so then is it fair to say that your focus, if I heard that correctly, you start with like the management team, kind of the top level, but ultimately you want to get to the supervisors, the frontline. You want to make sure that there's alignment between the two so that they understand this is the new ideology or methodology we're going to use. Can you share with us at all, sort of like in general, sort of where those leaders are starting? Like, what are the most common kind of faults that you find there, why they're having trouble with this? And then what is it that you're teaching them about to get them to have more influence on the culture and to change?
Great question. I want to say something just before I jump into that answer about why the frontline coal-face leader is so important. In an ideal circumstance, we would train every plant employee on emotional intelligence and positive psychology and the importance of safety and creating the right culture. But that's usually not cost effective and impractical. So the frontline supervisor is the one who's got the immediacy, the day-to-day interaction to actually influence the way that people, the belief that people have about the workplace. And they're also often the most credible. If a relatively senior leader shows up on the plant floor, they probably don't know, not in a really genuinely personal way, anything about the lives of the people up front line. But the frontline supervisor has a kind of familiarity. They can talk about the kid's baseball game that was on Sunday, or hey, how's your bowling league doing, and the things that make it a personal relationship meaningful. And they also often have this unspoken respect because they most often came from the line work, were good at it, and then came to be in a leadership role. And so that's great for their credibility and their influence. But going to your question a little bit, often comes with the fact that they don't have any formal leadership training. They were good at whatever the work was that was on the front line. And sometimes, you've probably heard this in your career when people say, I said to my new boss after I got hired into this role, I've never done something like this. How do I go about being a leader? And they often say, oh, well, just be yourself. And maybe myself was a guy who was really good at turning wrenches and knew nothing about managing people. And they're very different crafts. And while we often have a bunch of technical skills and also kind of certain kinds of intelligences that, whether it's spatial geometric or whatever our intelligence are, these kind of things generally freeze at around the 25 years of age. You're going to get as smart as you're ever going to be at about 25. That's true of IQ, but EQ, emotional intelligence, it's a learnable set of skills. And so we can teach that kind of stuff in very practical ways. And that's our usual practice, is to begin education about how do humans flourish? What is it that makes them behave at their very best? And we just lean into all the great findings from the last 25, 30 years about positive psychology and say, humans are at their best when they're in good emotional states. And I'm not exaggerating, John, these things are all true. They're healthier, they're smarter, they have better peripheral vision, they've got better energy, they've got better focus. And we could just go on and on and on and on about the individual human advantages of positive psychology. And then there's ample studies that show in any kind of industrial setting, the companies that have collective good psychology, good job engagement, job satisfaction, low anger, low stress, they have in fact much better outcomes: profitability, productivity, innovation, customer service, absence of sick leaves, reduced accidents, all those kind of things. So the translation is perfect from individuals do better when they're in a state of abundant positive emotions, and companies do better as the collective has better emotions. And so we're literally trying to teach leaders how to influence the feel of their frontline workforce. And it's not that everybody has to walk around like all day long grinning and, oh yeah, I'm just so darn happy. There's a lot of other kind of positive emotions that come in that umbrella term happiness. It could be inspiration, it could be pride, it could be gratitude, it could be confidence, it could be amusement if there's just good jovial interaction on the line, gratitude, all these kind of different kinds of emotions. And when we can just increase the likelihood that those are present and improve the interpersonal skills of the leaders so that they become coaches and not what the military talks about as knife hand. You're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to do this. And instead have people come along and say, hey, how are you going to get this done today? And, and specifically, can you address the safety concerns as we kind of take on this unusual project, and turn the people who are on the front line into the owners and experts of their own processes. That doesn't mean the supervisor might not add a lot of input, but it's this changing from being directive to being a leader who serves. And when we teach some of these skills, it makes a world of difference for all kinds of things. But my primary interest is for safe outcomes.
Let me ask you this. I can't remember exactly what. So I wrote an article on LinkedIn like 3 or 4 years ago. And it was something to do with safety culture. And I can remember this one guy who went on there, and how every once in a while people write comments that aren't exactly the friendliest comments you ever had.
Not on social media.
And It wasn't too bad, but he kind of said something that like the idea of safety culture was sort of a bunch of BS. And it actually made me think because huh, that's actually not a bad point because you have a culture. Um, why is safety culture something separate from your culture? And maybe I'm just curious how you think about this, and if because what I'm hearing is that you whatever you do, um, you could probably do it. Like not everyone's asking to come in and help improve safety, right? Like some companies might
I
just want
actually am doing more business on other facets of culture, other desired outcomes than
right,
I do on safety now.
right,
And it was accidental. That wasn't what I saw for my trajectory of my career. But you're 100% right. Culture is culture is culture. And if it's a good, positive, highly effective interpersonal culture, then it's going to drive a whole bunch of different outcomes. And often when we come in, we're directing the focus of this cultural change in a particular way, whatever the client's goal is. But we're looking to pick up successes in a myriad of other ways.
yeah. So like, and I don't know if this sentence is going to make any sense or not, but let's imagine um, here at our workplace, we do a barbecue once a week or something,
Yeah.
and let's imagine that it's on Fridays, and we also like to have a good time, so we have some drinks.
Yeah.
I'm making this up. We don't do this. Um, that would have like a little bit of an influence on everybody. I'm assuming, and maybe that would spill over to the weekend a little bit, and maybe now we're not in the greatest shape as we all were. We're not as sharp as we were, and then imagine the leader says, you know what, we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to have those drinks. And then over time, you pay a little bit of attention, and instead of that, maybe instead of barbecue, we're going to have a little bit healthier food, and we're going to do an activity outside, and all of a sudden, everyone starts to get a little bit more in shape, and they feel better, and their lives all improve, and so when I think with safety culture, is it kind of like it's just another pillar of your foundation or whatever, or your structure that as a company, like people, you can't ignore it, but it's also it's going to everything's going to rise if you improve the culture. Is that kind of the way you would look at it?
100%. And the way that you talked about that reminds me of the work of is it James Cleary? I might have the author wrong, but this principle that if we're 1% better every day, and that may be a bit overly ambitious, but if we make a little incremental change here, and then we build on that little incremental change here and here and here and here and here, the ship maybe only makes a 3-degree pivot over 12 months, but you end up in Japan instead of Antarctica, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge difference in terms of your outcomes. And so we're trying to instill small behaviors. And I'll give you an example. One of the things, when that prison I told you about that was in such bad shape, um, they were an organization absent of interpersonal friendliness and appreciation. Everything was you have to,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a lot of this knife hand paramilitary type of leadership style. And one of the things that we instilled in the senior leadership team first, and it took months to embed this, and we didn't leave and start working with mid managers and supervisors until we got it right with senior leaders, was that they had to do an active appreciation every day,
Mm-hmm.
which I know sounds ridiculous and almost like kindergarten level stuff, but it was learning a new set of habits of literally observing what people are doing in the workplace, of which there were many good behaviors every single day, and calling them out. And, historically, probably for literally generations, all they had ever done was the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
This is wrong. That's wrong. Got to do this better. They even had this horrible reference. They referred to their frontline most junior person as Jaffa. And I'd been there for actually several weeks working with them. I kept hearing Jaffa this, Jaffa that. And I could tell from context that it was the most junior worker, somebody that you could send to a task. But one day I literally asked these leaders, I said, hey, what does Jaffa stand for? And they kind of had this wry little smile and kind of want to dodge the question first. And I said, no, I'm really curious. And I said, oh, well, it's just a humorous term that we use to refer to frontline workers. It stands for just another effing, except they didn't
Mm-hmm.
clean it up. Auxiliary, just another effing auxiliary. And they would talk to people to their face. Jaffa, go do this. Jaffa, go do that. And again, it seemed to them like a little bit of gallows humor, and prisons are, places where there's a lot of gallows humor. But obviously that erodes in a very fundamental way the way that we're going to feel about our alignment with our senior leaders if I'm referred to as Jaffa all the time as I start working in the organization. So these tiny 1% changes that in the beginning for organizations often don't feel like they're, how is that particularly strategic? In fact, make a huge difference.
Mm.
And you got to pick the right ones. You got to lean into things where the culture is already supportive. So, for example, paramilitary and military organizations often carry a lot of pride. They think that they do noble work. And so we want to lean into, well, what does a real noble professional behave like? Do they call people Jaffa this, Jaffa that? No, they call you correction officer Smith or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And when you imagine the shift in an organization where maybe I personally received words of genuine appreciation 3 or 4 times in the last 5 months, which previously I never heard,
Mm-hmm.
and people have stopped calling me Jaffa, and they now call me Correctional Officer Smith, CO Smith. And it's not subtle. It's after months of that, it's profound.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to find those right leverage points within an organization, start making really big change. And also just teaching a lot of fundamentals about what emotional intelligence and positive psychology is and how it's so influential. And John, if you'll let me just ramble on here for a second more,
Sure.
I'll talk about this idea of emotional contagion. It's this idea that humans are spreading emotions one to another all the time. In 2025, we have something called the third party effect. It's happening, the emotional contagion, but we mostly deny that it's happening to us. And we do it because we want to feel sane and rational. I don't want to feel like your emotions are going to drive how I behave or what I believe. So when it comes to your emotions, I think, no, John's not going to have much impact on me.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, if you show up really angry, let's say, and we're having a conversation, it's obvious to you as I say it, I'm going to be rattled and I'm going to be more anxious and maybe I'm going to get to an angry place myself. And so emotional contagion is happening all the time, everywhere, in every human gathering of groups of people. And all we want to do as leaders to become responsible for and aware of that more than anybody, they bring that weather. And again, in 2025, it sounds weird, but we are a hierarchical species. We're looking up the hierarchy to who our superior is.
Mm-hmm.
And more than anything, we're taking on their emotions. And so if my leader is dark and rainy, the subordinates are going to be cold and wet.
Mm-hmm.
And if the leader's what I call rationally optimistic, kind of got a positive, but not Pollyanna, oh, everything's so good, but just rational optimism and genuinely warm and caring about the people they work with, well, people are going to be bathed in that emotion that's simply good for their physiology, good
Mm-hmm.
for their mental energy, and obviously, I know it's so simple to say, obviously far more committed to that leader in that workplace when it gives them good vibes.
Mm-hmm. So I had a question. Thinking back, you've told the story a few times now with this company that kind of got you going, and sounds like their culture wasn't fantastic by any stretch of the imagination. Now, it's kind of back to the thought I had before as well, where like if you improve the culture, then things in general are going to improve. So when you first go into work with someone and you identify that, okay, we've got some work to do in the area of culture here and leadership doesn't quite get it. And once you feel like you've sort of made a shift just in the attitudes of people and how they're treating each other and things like that, then let's say they did bring you in for safety. Like, where are you shifting your focus? If it's not on policy and procedures, do you make a shift where you're like, okay, now we're gonna?
Yeah, I'll give you a really weird kind of example, and I haven't done it recently, but I have done it in the past, where we sometimes, myself or a colleague, shadow a frontline supervisor for a day, and we don't tell them the first time we do it what we're measuring. But one of the things we measure is how often they say anything about safety.
Mm-hmm.
And they may believe that they're a good safety leader. They may believe that they know the program real well, and they may genuinely support and like the people that they work with. But the truth is, if the conversations are never about how to get the job done safely, then they're not actually behaving their way into the culture we want. And so we've seen times where companies have gone from as little as about 18% of conversations have anything to do with safety. And that's a generous scoring. It has to be like,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's tangential, we'll give you a check mark for it. To companies that are where the supervisors are almost 75% of the time bringing a safety component into their conversation. So it might be the same productivity or quality conversation they've had a million times in the past, but they're in addition saying, we really got to make sure our quality scores are up, and at the same time not compromise safety at all. Let's have a conversation about that.
Mm-hmm.
And it simply changes the dynamic when people believe in a very consistent felt experience that my boss cares about safety on a routine, regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're measuring behaviors, not lagging. And I'm sure everybody in the safety business knows it's not the lagging indicators that say, did people get hurt or not? But are we demonstrating as a leading indicator the behaviors that are going to bring about improvements to the culture?
Mm. And would you say that the conversation about safety just isn't natural to people? The thought and the question I have, maybe to back that up, or not the question, but the thought is like, I actually worked at a place one time where we talked about safety so much that they made decisions that cost the company a lot of money, almost trying to be too safe. Right? So you probably don't see that very often. But so to me, I would still argue that they don't really have a great culture there because no one was being responsible with the money. It was all right. So yeah, like I would assume most places it's productivity, efficiency, those things come kind of natural to business operations. And, is safety just one that finds itself kind of on the outside looking in a lot?
It does a lot, and they're for exactly the reasons that you just said. Like companies exist to bring profit to the owners and shareholders,
Mm-hmm.
and we can't get away from that. And there are times, I don't know if I'm on your topic exactly, but there are times I've observed where safety is actually serving a purpose to reduce the quality of the culture. I'll give you an example. I worked with a big municipality, and in the roads department, where they had a bunch of just regular pickup trucks and other heavy duty equipment, they implemented a policy about how to put windshield washer fluid into a vehicle. And in some cultures, it would have been okay, but so they wanted people to wear plastic smock, safety goggles, safety rubber gloves. And I mean, let's face it, every single one of us, and I don't want to dismiss good safety procedures, but every single one of us who's at home does not do any of those things when we add windshield washer fluid to our vehicle. And so then there's this kind of what feels to the front line an absurdity to have an expectation that we diminish our productivity and the reasonableness of the way we go about our work to satisfy some over the top barrier to productivity.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this interesting dance to find what are the hard and fast, really serious rules, and at the same time having us live and breathe the idea that safety is really important, but not rule bound. It's tricky.
Mm.
I don't know if that quite answered your question, but I felt like it was on the same
No,
page a little bit.
yeah, and this is kind of one of those, I don't know, maybe it's a harder question, just one that I've kind of thought about myself a lot. So I'm glad that I like that story though. That's a good like, because yeah, you could definitely see with the windshield washer fluid, if he really went crazy, you could have a procedure for that. And yeah.
And
And
it contains a little bit of a harmful chemical, and there's, you could make the case. And in
mhm,
some cultures that already have amazing tight safety regulations around a lot of things, and an otherwise good culture that's supportive of it, you could implement that same safety procedure, and everybody would go thumbs up, cool. But in this culture, it was just totally received as a ridiculous barrier to productivity, such that now we could dismiss other safety conversations because we're just going to generally lump in the good with the bad.
mhm. Yeah. Well, this is I was going to say, I can't believe we're at 45 minutes already. It's been a pretty good conversation. So, but I do want to be respectful of your time, and so I'll thank you for coming on the show. This has been excellent. Is there any kind of closing thoughts, or even just something you'd like to share? Maybe a conference you're going to be attending, anything at all like that that you feel that people should hear about?
Well, maybe I'll share one other concept, and I've had different levels of success implementing it, but there's something I call a unifying purpose, and I don't think I didn't make it up. Some academic somewhere along the line I got it, so it's not my
Mhm.
idea. But most organizations have visions and missions, and they really speak mostly to an external audience. So, if a trucking company says, we're America's premier hauler of produce, that's a signal to shareholders, it's a signal to potential customers, but it doesn't. If I'm the frontline truck driver or guy who works in dispatch, do I give two
Mhm.
F's about whether or not we're the premier hauler? And so we want to change our internal vision, which we sometimes call a unifying purpose, to say, how is it that we go about doing the work together?
Mm.
What puts us on the same page to fulfill our day-to-day work? And it doesn't have to be slogany, but it would be the kind of thing that you'd want people to be able to say, if you've learned it and really instilled it in the organization. You'd want people to be able to kind of conversationally say, hey, my number one purpose today is to get you home safe. And for a leader to be able to say that with sincerity and kind of runs through the culture, that goes a long, long way. Because you might
Mhm.
see some, how it is in workplaces, somebody ready to get onto something with a grinder and just like, I'm going to fix that right away. And hey, whoa, cool your jets. My number
Mhm.
one purpose is to get you home safe. Your wife and family is more important than this piece of equipment. And when we get that right, the unifying purpose in an organization, it's kind of fundamental to our new cultural identity.
Mm.
There's my last thought.
No, that's really good. No, I guess that's a great place to close it off. So thanks again for coming on the show, and yeah, it was a pleasure.
My pleasure, John. Take care.